Welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center's Candidate Forum. This is where we let you know about the candidates, why they're running for office, and where they stand on the issues. Hi, I'm Richard Nelson, your moderator. Joining us in this forum is State Senator Steve Meredith, who represents Senate District 5. That's in West Kentucky. And the counties consist of Breckenridge, Edmondson, Grayson, Hart, LaRue, and Meade counties. Senator Meredith was first elected in 2016, and he chairs the Senate Health Services Committee. Senator Meredith, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Pleasure being here. One quick correction, though. Because of redistricting, my district now consists of Meade, Breckenridge, Grayson, Butler, and Ohio counties.
Thank you for that correction. And I just pulled this off of the LRC website, so I'm going to pass the buck and blame them. If anybody at the LRC is listening, we need to update that. That is an important change because every 10 years there's a census done. And the population shift in Kentucky. And it's shifted in West Kentucky and in East Kentucky. And more people, we're losing population there in both those parts of the state. And then they're moving to the Golden Triangle, if you will, Louisville, Lexington, and Northern Kentucky. How much of a shift was there, by the way, in your district, the population shift?
District stayed the same. And I'm like everyone else. I don't like change. So I looked at the numbers, knowing that redistricting was coming up, and President Stivers, I saw him coming down the hallway of the annex during the interim session, and I'm trying to avoid him because I know he's going to talk about redistricting. And so he stops me and said, Steve, we need to talk. And I go, my district's fine. I've run the numbers. I'm fall within the margin of error there. He said, no, I'm sorry. And for the very reason you alluded to, we're losing population on the west end of the state and eastern end of the state, and it's compressing everything to the middle. Yeah. So it shifted me just a little bit west because I lost LaRue, Hart, and Edmondson County. So we are seeing that shift to the west. Plus, mine was probably impacted a little bit by losing Senator Embry, who passed away that previous summer. So his district was divided up amongst three senators. So that influenced it as well. Very
good. Steve, you have served 2 full terms in the state Senate. What are some of your major accomplishments or some of the highlights in those your first 8 years?
Probably on the macro level, I'm very proud that during that 8 years, I think it's been some of the most transformational time in the history of the state. Mm-hmm. You know, our first session, we passed right to work laws, prevailing wage, we repealed. The next year, we did the income tax reduction. And for the first time in over a decade of efforts, we passed pro-life bills. And I think it's made it one of the strongest pro-life states in the United States. I'm very proud of that. And you see all the economic development that we're realizing now is a direct result of that legislation we passed back in 2017, 2018. On a more macro level, probably one I'm most proud of is I was the chair of a task force to reorganize the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. Mm-hmm. You know, it's our largest cabinet, over 7,000 employees, between $30 and $50 billion in funding flows through that cabinet. It's just a huge bureaucracy. So we had a task force to try to reorganize and make it more effective. And most pronounced that came out of that was dealing with child welfare payments. We were $1.4 billion in arrears, and apparently had been that way for over a decade. And we thought we needed to move that. So I passed legislation in the previous session to move that responsibility to the Attorney General's office. And we're very excited about that. Transition not going to take place until 2025 to give them time to adjust for it. But this is something that's been needed for a long, long time.
So if I could, I'm sorry to interrupt, but have you seen positive results after moving it to the Attorney General's office?
No, because really it's not, they haven't taken responsibility for it because they have to have a kind of organizational shift. Okay. We got to move those resources from one cabinet to another. So it really won't take place until this coming year. But I'm very encouraged by the County Attorneys Association, which is an integral part of this, have been very supportive of this effort. And obviously, we weren't getting results if we had a $1.4 billion deficit in those payments. So that's, I think, will be monumental going forward. On a very macro level, one of the things I'm really proud of, particularly being a senior citizen, is, you know, when you have maintenance drugs, you know, my background is healthcare, but when you have maintenance drugs such as blood pressure medicine, cholesterol medicine, it used to be you had to go to the drugstore every 30 days. Yeah. I passed legislation that said no, for maintenance drugs, you can get a 90-day refill. Okay. So it's a small thing, but particularly in the small rural communities that I represent, it's a big thing for seniors so they don't have to travel to get their prescription drugs.
I'm sure that the senior citizens in your district could appreciate that, not just in your district, but across the state.
Well, I know I appreciate it.
Very good. Steve, you had mentioned pro-life legislation. You came in 2017, which really was the beginning of a pro-life wave or shift in this country. Between 2016, when Matt Bevin first really had his first year in office, to by the time he left, 13 pro-life bills were enacted, including the trigger law that passed in 2019, which said that if Roe v. Wade's ever overturned, abortion would be banned in Kentucky. And that is what happened in 2022. We had the Dobbs decision come down from the U.S. Supreme Court, and the trigger law went into effect, and abortion is now outlawed. Did you ever think that you'd see a time when there would be no abortion facility in the Commonwealth of Kentucky?
Well, I think that our Republican control, was always cautiously optimistic. But I think if my colleagues are honest, we'd say, no, we never envisioned this happening, and nothing short of a miracle, but a great miracle. And again, proud that Kentucky is one of the strongest pro-life states in the United States.
And you ran as a pro-life candidate back in when you first ran in 2016. For that seat. Kentucky is one of 14 states that does not have an abortion center in it. Steve, one thing that's changed in the last 8 years since you first took office, it seems to me, the temperament of the voters. It seems that there's more frustration, there's more anger, maybe less patience with government in general, particularly at the federal level, particularly with Congress and presidential politics. But have you seen changes like that as well in your district, representing your part of the state, and then also being in Frankfort? Have you noticed any of that as well?
Most certainly. And I think that the genesis of that is a sense of hopelessness on the part of people in the Commonwealth. And had a committee meeting this morning for government contract review, and we talked about the tragic situation with teenage or school children suicide.
Yeah.
And I gave the quote from Henry David Thoreau from almost 200 years ago, where he said, the mass of men and women led lives of quiet desperation. Yeah. And he rolled that forward 200 years, and it's as bad now as it was 200 years ago. And you've got to ask why. And I think it goes back to this hopelessness. And, I'd like to say, you can go 40 days without food, 4 days without water, 4 minutes without oxygen, but you can't go a single day without hope. And I think we've robbed a lot of people of hope.
I'd listened to a podcast actually on the way into the office this morning on that very topic of hopelessness. We live in a day when suicide is at all-time highs, especially for single men. In teenage populations, suicide for young teenage years is the second leading cause of death. And then for the upper teenage years, it's also the second leading cause of death, which is tragic. We have drug abuse problems, opioids, where if they're not killing themselves that way, we have overdoses. I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 overdoses per day in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Why, in the freest, most prosperous nation on the face of the earth, are we facing such an epidemic of hopelessness, Steve? Any idea?
I most certainly do. As a matter of fact, we talked about that this morning in our government contract review, because we had a contract to deal with resources for school-age suicide and how tragic that is. And I noted that 4 years ago in a Health Services Committee meeting, we had 3 doctors from the University of Kentucky talk about teenage suicide, how it increased dramatically over a 10-year period. Mm-hmm. And I asked a question. It wasn't a leading question, just I was curious. I said, with all the data you have available to you, can you kind of stratify it and tell me, is there a particular segment of our population that has a higher probability of suicide than others? Is it by race? Is it by income? Is there anything? And they said, no, it's pretty standard across the board. Except one physician stopped. He said, no, there's a small percentage of young people that have a lower probability of suicide. And that's children, young people who have some degree. And this is where he really struggled. He thought the longest time to try to phrase this. He said, those children who have some degree of religiosity, less likelihood of suicide. And I said, if that's statistically relevant, which obviously it is, why isn't that part of the overall plan to address this? And it goes back to the hopelessness again. If you don't feel there's a purpose in your life, you don't feel that you're loved in life, it drives you to that kind of desperation. And I think that's where our nation is today. And I've often wondered, of all the studies that we do regarding drug overdoses, why I've never seen any data as to why people will do it to begin with, knowing that potentially it could be the last thing they ever do. What are they searching for that pushes them to that edge? And I think what they're looking for, certainly they're going to find in the drugs, that it's found in our belief in a higher being.
Yeah. I think it was Augustine who said, our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. I come from a Christian worldview. I'm a believer, and I do believe that we're made for God, and that when we are disconnected from God, which the Christian worldview teaches, that we're made to glorify God, we're made to walk with God, we're made to be reconnected with Him through His Son Jesus Christ. But when we don't do that, we're kind of on our own. We're without a path in life. We're without direction, and I think that's part of the hopelessness that's there. If I could.
I think everybody wants to have a sense of purpose. And if you can't find that, then you're going to struggle in the proverbial wilderness of the universe, and that's very unfortunate. And 35 years ago, in June, I fell 20 feet and landed head first on a concrete floor. I should be here. There's no reason why I should be here. But I know that God has a purpose for my life, and that's one of the reasons I choose to serve in the legislature.
Okay. I remember talking to you a couple years ago. You were on the campaign trail, and you had shared that you had a reinvigorated faith. I don't know if that's how you put it, but I do know that your faith shapes your approach to public policy. And you did have something that got a hold of you just a few years ago. Do you want to tell us how your faith shapes how you approach the policy arena?
Well, certainly. I was baptized when I was 10 years old. And I was baptized when I was 10, but probably found God when I was 60. Because as you get older, and here's one of my favorite quotes from Muhammad Ali. So if you're the same person at 50 that you are at 20, you've wasted 30 years of your life. And there's not many advantages of being 70 years old, but one is you can look in the rearview mirror of life to see how it's unfolded. And I'm able to see that for everything I thought was bad happening in my life, something great and glorious came out of it. But one of my inspirations is my youngest son. Both are an inspiration to me, but my youngest son because of his faith. He was baptized when he was 12, 13 years old, and I've never met anyone that has the faith that he does. But it caused him some problems in high school because that's not embraced by a lot of people. It caused him some problems in sports. And we were actually in another county playing a basketball game, and ironically, even the coaches seemed to get caught up in it. And Bryce could not do anything right on the basketball floor. And we're at this gymnasium, and one of those incidents happened. And so I'm asking, dear Lord, here's a young guy who just loves you more than life itself. How can you let it happen to him? And I say this without any exaggeration at all. It's just like we're sitting here right now. God spoke to me and said, I'm taking care of him. I can't begin to tell you that peace that came over me as a result of that. And you look at his life and walking hand in hand with God, God's been there with him every second. But me as well. You don't have the kind of action that I had 35 years ago and not realize that there's got to be some divine providence that's involved with this. And the reason I ran for office was I retired in 2013. I was a hospital CEO for 30 years, and my goal was always to get out at 59 and a half. And again, blessed to do it. My boys were grown. My wife was teaching second grade still. I was home with my 2 Labrador retrievers and doing things that I hadn't got to do for years. But I described it as having like a pebble in your shoe, just something didn't feel right. And wasn't sure what it was. But I do believe in the scripture, much is given to you, much is expected in return. And I'm one of the most blessed men on the face of the earth. But we heard a sermon, my wife and I heard a sermon back in 2016 about the different way God speaks to us, that it's not as direct as we would like it sometimes. And my wife is the most apolitical person you've ever met in your life. Mine was an open seat, and she said just out of nowhere, you need to run for this seat. Over the next 6-7 weeks, she kept saying, you need to run for this seat. So I'm thinking, I guess I need to run for the seat. So I have no illusions about it. I'm here by the will and grace of God, and I'll serve as long as he wants me to serve.
Kentucky is at a crossroads. We can choose to give in to the radical left, or we can choose to engage the culture in a God-honoring way.
I started the Commonwealth Policy Center because I believe that Christians have a responsibility to influence government and society to the glory of God. While the Commonwealth Policy Center's made a significant impact, our work isn't finished. If you'd like to join our movement working for timeless values, then head to our website.
To learn more, go to CommonwealthPolicyCenter.org.
If you're just joining us, you're tuned in to the Commonwealth Policy Center's Candidate Forum, and joining us is State Senator Steve Meredith from the 5th Senate District, and he is running for re-election. The primary is on May the 21st. Early voting starts a few days prior to that, but this is your opportunity to get to know Senator Meredith, who he is, and why he's running for office. Steve, you are in the middle of a General Assembly session, really just a couple of days. You're going to come back for the veto override session soon. How would you gauge this last session?
It's been the most frustrating session that I've had among the 8 that I've served. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. You know, we had a supermajority now in both chambers for 3 or 4 years now. And you think that'd be a very positive thing, but I don't think we realize the full benefit from it. And bear in mind, again, we have 138 legislators. That means there's 138 different agendas. Yeah. And when you have a 30-day session or 60-day session, there's a very narrow bandwidth to get things accomplished. And we're pushing things through at the very last moment. And I don't think it's the best way to formulate policy. I'm not sure it's the best way that we have moved the state forward. But, you know, we've made some great progress over the last 3 or 4 years. And, you know, talking about things that I'm proud of, our tax reform that we have done, which is, I think, been phenomenal for Kentucky. It resulted in the economic growth that we're seeing with new job creation. But think about it. Based on the median income in Kentucky, so far we have reduced personal income tax from 6% to 4%. Okay. That's putting over $1,100 in working families' pockets each and every year. Okay. When we fully get through this, it'll be worth close to $3,300 every year.
So tell us what you did this last session. We have a budget surplus, and you were still on track to phase this out. The state income tax was, we're looking to phase that out. Yes, or, I'm sorry, the sales tax.
Income tax.
Personal income tax. Thank you. We're on track to phase that. What was done this last session?
Set the parameters again. You know, we've done this in very stepwise fashion, was very wise. When Kansas tried to do this, they tried to do it all at once, and it was a dismal failure. So we need to do it in stepwise fashion, which we have done. Have to hit certain trigger points before we'll institute the next reduction, which we hope we can do next January. And I think we can get there. But what set this up to begin with is in 2017, my first session, I come to learn that 50% of the income in Kentucky had been exempted from taxation. 50%. And you got 40% of our working age adults not in the labor pool. So that leaves a very small percentage of our population carrying the full tax burden for the state of Kentucky. And who's that? That's working families in Kentucky. So that's not right.
Let's talk about the 40% of working age Kentuckians, this is 18 to 60, that are not in the labor pool. Why is that, and what can be done to address that?
I think part of it is we've got to do a better job of preparing people for vocations. I really appreciate what we've done with workforce development. I think we'll see benefits from that. But again, in our poorest communities, in which, you know, we're a poor state, for some folks, they're literally addicted to welfare payments. They don't know any other life. Yeah. Not being critical of them, it's just that's all they've ever known, and that perpetuates itself. You know, we see in a lot of our counties, poverty is multi-generational, and no way to lift themselves out of it. So if you're not in the workforce, that means that probably you're not generating any income, and you have to rely upon welfare payments to sustain you. So that's a double whammy. Yeah. We're not just not getting tax revenues, but we're also paying out entitlement payments. So that's one of the principal reasons Kentucky is a poor state. But, you know, folks always react with, well, you need to tax the poor. I mean, the rich. Yeah. Well, the rich, the truly rich, if you raise their taxes, they're going to be living in Florida because they don't have income tax, at least 6 months out of the year, or Tennessee. And we've got to address that. So how do you do it? Well, one is you reduce personal income tax, but you also expand the sales tax base and tax things that heretofore haven't been taxed that are really, for the most part, purchased through discretionary income. Yeah. Like this last previous session, we taxed tattoos.
Okay.
You pay for that discretionary income. We have taxed golf green fees. A lot of golfers don't like that, but kind of is what it is. But that's how we increase the revenues. And in turn, the money that we're putting back in Kentuckians' pockets, they can use to buy things. Now, one of the things that we have taxed that folks have been critical of is car repairs. Well,
Okay.
yeah, I get that. But now you've got $1,100 that you can use to pay for that car repair.
Sure.
If we hadn't put this back in your pocket, how would you have paid for that?
So what you and the legislature have done is broadening the tax base. It's spreading it out over a number of different industries where sales tax are collected, and there's a choice. Some of these things are luxuries, like you said, tattoos. There's other things, other entertainment that is being taxed.
Cosmetic surgery that's not medically necessary.
Okay, very good.
And it's the fairest tax. That way everybody has to contribute something. That's the way it should be.
Yeah. Steve, let's talk about an important issue this last legislative session. Maybe this contributed to your frustration. I don't know. But DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There was a bill in the Senate. One of your colleagues, Mike Wilson, sponsored Senate Bill 6. There was a bill in the House. Jennifer Decker sponsored that. Two competing versions, which would have pushed against DEI initiatives, particularly in our public universities. Neither bill passed. But you had a bill, Senate Bill 93.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm co-chair of Government Contract Review Committee, and supposedly we review every contract that comes through the state. And I noticed over the last couple of years that we were approving contracts to create positions of regional DEI coordinators through the Department of Education. And this is funded by a federal grant. And first, I don't believe in DEI to begin with, but I'm asking what happens at the end of 2024 when federal funds are no longer available? Do these people lose their job? Never could get an answer on that. It was, no, we'll reassign them other duties, and go, well, why? But what that told me was that this is ingrained in our education system. And my bill simply said that you can't use any public funds to support DEI activities in our public schools.
And it didn't get a hearing?
Did not get a hearing.
So what was because we do know more and more people are aware of what DEI does. And by the way, I think that the E part, the E portion of it, which is equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the equity is different than equality of opportunity. And this is where it can be used as a discriminatory measure against certain groups and discriminatory ideas that were taught in the public universities. But are people just not aware that this is happening in K through 12?
I don't think they're aware. I mean, there's some isolated incidents that have been reported, but I'm telling you, literally, we're spending millions of dollars on these activities in our public school systems, and I don't think folks are aware of it. As I said, a lot of it's been supported by federal funding. Now that's gone away. We need to fund education. It's every budget session we have, and I think we've done some good things with this budget. Is it enough? Probably not, but it could be better if we weren't spending money on these activities that really don't do anything to promote education. We need to be investing in reading and writing and math and sciences, and that's not the priority for some of our school systems.
Did teachers in your district get in touch with you and talk about focusing in these other areas that we're talking about, which takes them away from teaching the basics? Are they being burdened with excessive regulations and with other things that they have to do that takes them away from the actual teaching function?
Oh, they most certainly do. And this is back when, Jason Glass was commissioner of our education, and I'm on the education committee, and we talked about this very issue of teacher turnover. And my wife was a second grade teacher for 32 years, so I'm kind of on the front lines of this thing. And I see it, and I suggested to him, we're doing all these things, they're supposedly state of the art, but we never ask the teachers, what can we do to make your life easier? Yeah. And I suggested to him, why don't you put together a task force, not of principals, superintendents, just teachers, to find out what can we do to make your life better. Yeah. And he never embraced that idea. I hope the next or commissioner of education does, but teachers are very frustrated, and rightfully so, and they don't want to deal with these issues that aren't germane to teaching the core curriculum. They've got enough on their hands without having to deal with that.
Steve, dealing with another issue that came up this last General Assembly session was Senate Bill 147, which restricted sexually oriented performances from public places, particularly where children are present. The original focus was on drag shows, the drag communities coming out in public and involving children, which has been controversial. That language was taken out, but I had a chance to testify on that bill. I heard you speak on that bill as well. You voted for it, but you had some concerns about drag performances in particular. Tell us about that.
I most certainly do. And, a lot of attention has been paid to drag queen story time in libraries. And I asked the question, which I don't think I ever did receive an adequate response, where's the entertainment value and educational value to children? And I spoke specifically about my 4-year-old granddaughter. What is she supposed to get out of this? It makes no sense whatsoever. We're trying to protect children from trauma. I can assure you that if she saw that, she would be traumatized because she doesn't understand it. It's just like Santa Claus. To young kids, Santa Claus is a scary character. And it's not until they get older they appreciate the story of Santa Claus. But if you see this, doesn't that traumatize children? I think it does.
Now, one of your Democratic colleagues on that committee, State Senator Karen Berg from Louisville, tried to defend sexually oriented performances with young people in attendance. She said that could be a good thing, a beneficial thing. So you're disagreeing?
I vehemently disagree. Again, kids don't understand at that age. Yeah. And it does perplex them. I think it causes some mental and emotional anxiety that may not surface for years. But I do it as simple as, why can't we let children be children? Yeah. And there's a concerted effort to rob them of their childhood, and I just can't find that acceptable.
Yeah. And by the way, your colleagues agreed that bill passed overwhelmingly out of committee. It passed the Senate and the House. No, I take it back. It passed the Senate. It did not get a hearing in the House. Senate Bill 147 will have to come back next year or during the 2-day override period for you all to address that. Second Amendment. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment?
I've always been strong Second Amendment. There's a reason that it's there to protect citizens from government. I don't think it should ever be compromised. The Constitution is very straightforward. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that controlling guns is going to solve the problem. In Great Britain, where they've had gun control for years, the weapon of choice now are knives. Mm. And those incidents occur frequently. So it's not the instrument, it's what's in people's hearts.
Yeah, that's a good way to address that. LGBT ideology in public schools. You passed a bill last year, Senate Bill 150, which kept out the teaching of gender indoctrination, is what people have called it, from K through 12. It also banned gender dysphoric minors from pursuing hormone therapy and gender mutilation surgery, kept boys out of the girls' bathrooms as well. Was that an important issue to you and to your district?
Most certainly is, and probably more important because I've got 5 granddaughters, and I just can't envision someone with the male body parts going into their restroom for whatever reason, and it doesn't make sense. But saw a study just last night, I can't remember the country, whether it's Finland or Sweden, but they have seen that most kids who think they're transgender grow out of it. And that should tell us something right there. And I'm sure there are extreme issues where people truly think they're of another sex, but why can't we wait till you're 18 years old to make that determination rather than a child 10, 11 years old?
Now, a former state representative, Bob Helleringer, who lobbies for the Kentucky Fairness Campaign, says that bills like this just gang up and bully LGBT-identified people. How do you address that?
Well, first, children are very accepting of each other. Mm-hmm. And I think we overlook that many, many times. And I think we try to impress adult norms on children. I don't think it's the issue of bullying is extreme as people would make it to be. Mm-hmm. But it's such a small portion of our population that is supposedly affected by that. But while I have great respect for Bob, I would have to disagree with him that that's the issue. Again, we need to be focused on our efforts on more important things.
Sure. Steve, we are running out of time. If you're elected for another term, what do you hope to accomplish? Are there any issues on the horizon for you?
Most certainly. And the primary reason I went to the legislature was to fight poverty in Kentucky. And it frustrates me to no end that we haven't done a better job of addressing the core issues related to that. And many of the societal problems we're dealing with right now are a directly resultant from that. And I hope that maybe we have more of a concentrated effort to really address that, particularly in rural communities. I'm a rural community advocate, and that's where we see the most pronounced poverty. But hand in hand with that is completely reducing personal income tax. I think that's going to catapult our state forward with economic development and job creation, put money back in our working families' pockets, particularly in this period of high inflation and high interest rates. And that, I think, will help working families more than anything we could possibly do.
Very good. Steve, we've got just less than a minute here. Tell us why voters in your district should send you back for a third term.
Well, I was asked in my first election by a young lady in Breckenridge County what piece of scripture best described my campaign. Thought, what a great question for politicians. And I gave her Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you, saith the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. And that's my commitment to the people in my 5th district. I want to see everyone prosper. I don't want to harm anyone. I want to give them a hope in the future. And if we do, it's going to be a better world for all of us.
Very good. Steve Meredith, thank you so much for joining us on this candidate forum. And thank you all for tuning in. May God bless you. And don't forget to vote. May the 21st is Election Day. Early voting starts a few days before that.